Alright everyone, it's time for Late Nights with Sticks. Of course, here it's the middle of the night, United States afternoon. An anonymous source once more leaking information from Donald Trump. Now, where have we seen this before? Oh, that's right. It kept happening consistently throughout the entirety of the Trump presidency. Most of the time, there was never corroboration. There was never any follow-up because there was no evidence that there was such a source. I have a feeling that the source here, if it exists at all, was someone from Axios or Salon. They went to a phone booth and called into their own office to say, hey, yeah, I work with Trump. Here's the real skinny on one of his conversations. This time, the Psyop deals with Trump and Ron Desantis. There is an ongoing shill effort by people who are absolutely goddamn terrified that Trump will make a return, or that, by the way, DeSantis could end up winning because he's done a good job on COVID. He's obviously from a competitive state, Florida. I think that both of them terrify the neoliberals. Trump probably more. They know he's time-tested. He's a populist. DeSantis is making overtures in that direction. Youngkin, by the way, partially now redeeming himself as well by doing the same. The upswelling of populism in the GOP, and to an extent out of the GOP among independents, has the Democrats absolutely shitting their pants right now. What better way to try to tackle this than to say, well, among populists, Trump is popular. The majority of the party highly approves of him. DeSantis is increasingly popular. Let's play the two off against one another and try to crack this movement apart into different poles of people based on literally nothing. And so right now, some people have said, well, Trump's had his run. He didn't do what I wanted him to do. I'm done. I'm not on the Trump train. Sometimes the people saying that are being genuine. Sometimes they're not being genuine. Other people would say, well, I'm still riding with Trump. DeSantis is, he's done something that I didn't like. I won't vote for him. Again, some of these people are being genuine. Some of those people are not being. And the fact is that populism is not Trump. Populism is not DeSantis. Populism is not Rand Paul or any of these other things. It's an overall, broad, overarching ideology with these different individuals being more or less components of it. So what better way to try to deflate a movement that right now has a massive advantage over neoliberalism and is forcing out the neocons than to try to sow derision. So when I see an anonymous source, which I'll speak to you, legacy media, but only if you keep my name secret. Again, where have we heard this before? Saying, well, in private, Donald Trump says that Ron DeSantis is dull, that he doesn't have charisma and leadership capabilities. I'm trying to figure out why Trump would actually say that. Number one, because Trump and DeSantis, they come from the same vaguely populistic background. Number two, at least in public, have never gone after each other. And this, by the way, is not coincidental timing. It comes mere days after, well, Donald Trump at his rally was talking about people who had gotten the booster and saying that they should be loud and proud about it and stop hiding the fact that they got a booster. Why is it that DeSantis, if Trump doesn't run the heir apparent potential populist candidate in 24, why is it that DeSantis, because there are plenty of other Republicans that don't want to mention their vax status, why is he the one that the legacy media proposes is the automatic subject of what Donald Trump was saying? Now, some of these people are appealing to the concept of palace politics and saying, well, Donald Trump feels threatened by DeSantis. If he runs, he feels DeSantis will be a threat. Ah, grasshopper. But that excuse does not make much sense for several reasons. The first reason is that Donald Trump, in all likelihood, as the de facto incumbent, wouldn't face a primary. That's number one. He'd probably just be appointed to that position because a lot of the people that do like him happen to be taking over power at the local levels, which again terrifies the Democrats. Number two, we have it from DeSantis himself that he would step aside and not run at all if Donald Trump does choose to run. Where's the threat to Trump? And ergo, why would he go after DeSantis if there's not going to be any threat from him? He would be pitched, I think, more as a potential running mate, although I don't think that's a good idea. I think that there are other better alternatives, not because DeSantis is problematic. I would vote for him if he did run in the absence of Trump running. but because he occupies a pretty important position. He's a popular governor in a state that is generally considered to be a very, very close swing state. I realize it's moving red now, partially because of Cuban voters and Bernie Sanders, partially because of the flipping of parts of the center of the state more towards the GOP, especially in registrations. But if you have studied politics as I have for long enough, you can put two and two together and look at the situation and say, you don't really have a source. They're unnamed if they exist at all. Even if they have a source that claims to be genuine and it isn't one of their staffers calling them from a bathroom or from a broom closet, that doesn't necessarily mean that what they're saying is true. You may have noticed when things like this happen, where there's something potentially to be gained by the globalists, the neo-lib, neocon sort of core. In this case, cracking apart the populist movement into sub-fronts that will fight one another over who the leader of populism is. This is, I believe, their goal. I'm 99% sure that this is a Psyop as opposed to some organic thing. You may have noticed that it's a now long-standing tradition, not even since 2015-16, but before that you'll have a large number of legacy media groups reporting similar things or on the same subject with very similar wording in a very, very quick span of time. Now, while legacy media outlets borrow material from one another's, and if something is substantial, of course, it's not going to be able to be helped that they're reporting on the same thing. When you see this level of similarity and this rapidity of the spread of something, it's because it's being astroturfed. They're trying to get it trending. They're trying to get all of Trump and Desantis, various fans, to see this story. And when you see it spoken of, like if you look on certain online forums at this very moment, as I'm making this video, like 4chan, you'll see the article itself misrepresented. And that's the other thing. Politically aware people would have read the article and said, look, it's an anonymous source, which means it's absolutely nothing. Without any questioning, by the way, whatsoever, number one, of the validity of the source, and number two, the rapidity of it being oft reported by so many sites with such similar wording in such a span of time. That's because it is astroturfed. This is a psyop designed to denigrate the populist movement. It's partially prefaced on something else, which I'll be reporting on probably tomorrow, if not the next day. If you look at polling with regards to voter registration right now, the upswelling of the GOP, which is predominantly populistic, it is not neocons doing this, it's populists, or at least people who talk the populist talk, whether they walk the walk you see later. They're the ones disproportionately, like 80-90% of these people in that upswelling. These are the new wave of Republicans. These are not Bush Republicans or Dick Cheney Republicans. These are people that viscerally hate those movements, which, by the way, is why they're growing now as even a partisan front. It is the populist core doing that. It's Steve Bannon, Scott Pressler, people like that are on the ground that have realized what I stated years ago, which is that you have to go at the lowest level first. You have to build the foundation before you build the rest of the house. Otherwise, your house fucking falls apart and the floor rots and there's termites everywhere. They've realized that there are a million vulnerable precinct and local and state level positions that they can go after, and they're going in and subsuming goddamn everything, county by county, throughout parts of the United States. If they keep it up, and if the Democrats lose in the midterms as terribly as they can probably be predicted to, because since the registration gap hasn't favored the GOP this much since '94, and by the way, look at that particular election and the makeup of the House, especially thereafter, you'll get a hint of what I'm talking about. The establishment may not have enough neocon Republicans left in the Republican Party to actually maintain control. We're talking about a generational shift in politics that would completely upend the globalist order. It would set them back to square one if it allowed them to have a square to begin with. And so they're terrified of Trump, they're terrified of DeSantis, they're also terrified of Rand Paul, which is why YouTube's gunning for him and looking for any excuse to kick him off. They're terrified that their media buddies are losing so much steam. And while they pretend to operate with this aura of invulnerability, it's really just Sun Tzu stratagem. appearing strong when you're weak. They're weak. They're losing support all across the U.S. The id poll is no longer working. Hispanic voters are abandoning neoliberalism in droves, partially due to economic conditions. They're not operating from strength. When they resort to this, or when you see Oliver Darcy trying to dog whistle to censor OAN or something like that, it's because they feel weak. They feel scared. They're afraid of losing their monopolism. Anyway, anonymous source says that Trump thinks lowly of Desantis. Probably what they want is for DeSantis fans to think that that happened, which I highly doubt did, so that it provokes a response, so that you can get the populists fighting. Because as long as you can keep them fighting one another, it's harder for them to make any civic progress in doing what has been so successful for the last year, which is subsuming the lower power workings of the entire Republican Party, so that it's no longer friendly to the Bushes. It's no longer the party for the Cheneys. It's no longer the party for the Dan Crenshaws. It's not a party for Ann Coulter. It's a party for actual populism and actual change. And by the way, when you talk about Coulter and some of these other people, they too are shills that are trying to stir up trouble between these relative poles because they're afraid of it. I genuinely believe that she's a liberal who plays a bimbo conservative on TV for fun and for profit. Oh yeah, anonymous source my ass. I mean, by the way, to people who support Trump or DeSantis or anyone else under the sun that are taken in by this, did you learn nothing from the latter half of the 2010s? This hasn't happened a dozen goddamn times in the last few years? An anonymous source says Donald Trump hired Russian hookers to piss on the Obama's bed. An anonymous source says he actually doesn't make any money and his tax returns are all fraudulent and fucked up. An anonymous source says that he secretly hates his closest allies, and doesn't it comport to the Trump derangement syndrome thing just a little bit too closely for you to not be incredulous at the facticity of it? I know it boggles my mind as to how anyone could be taken in by such obvious propaganda, but remember, the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. I don't believe this crap for 1 second. That's about all. Peace out.